To you, what happened to your eye? You hit me again. I doubt it. What happened? Oh,
A bush.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to put up Christmas lights.
That'll happen. A couple of folks I know are under the weather and afflicted and all the rest, and so it's not the right time of year for that. But just take care of yourselves. Be smart. Do the right thing. All the rest. So this morning I was a little alarmed. I'd be more alarmed if I didn't bring it on myself, but I was a little alarmed to read in the bulletin about today's forum, which I'm trying to think how it's worded now. I don't have my bulletin with me, but do you have one there? Yeah. So in the bulletin it says about the forum today, it says Rector's Choice.
That's because they didn't know what you were going to do.
Some Advent, some walkabout, some 3 question marks in a row. Come to the forum and be surprised. And I'm thinking to myself, who's going to be more surprised? But truth be told, I brought that on myself because that's kind of what I told Jan would be the forum. Is that, early in the week when we chatted about it a little bit, I said, I don't quite know what I'm going to do yet. And so that's where we ended up. Hi, Peggy. Welcome. So we'll do some Advent and we'll do some walkabout stuff, and I have another little surprise for you as well. Speaking of Advent, I'm just curious, anybody doing the Advent Word global Advent count? You're getting the meditations. Are anybody posting the pictures? Jay and I are.
I am. Say that again, sir. I'll take pictures.
Advent Word. So here, let's get out of this for a second and just get curious. What happens if I get hashtag Advent Word 2015? Let's just keep it simple. And then we'll do images and see what pops up. I don't know what's going to pop up. Mostly the logos for the people in charge of it. So these are the words they're giving us day by day. What's today's word? Today's word is hashtag care. So let's add a hashtag care to the search.
Oh, then you have those are 2 pictures from somebody who posted them.
Which ones are you seeing?
The 2 women and then
The 2 women here?
yeah, and that rooster.
And the rooster?
I don't know what
How does that refer to word? Well, it doesn't always come through very well, but
Sometimes people post an explanation.
The word of the day is care.
the word of the day is care. I'm
look
guessing
at
this
that
is
card.
calling for us to care for planet Earth. I'm guessing.
Look at the snow.
No, this isn't as effective as some of them. I'm sorry. Let's just get out of this and go back to where we started. Yeah.
The first day was a pretty good one.
And it's mixed. So yesterday's word was believe. And I had an idea of what I wanted to do with it, but then when we got to the church in Lakeview, they had tables decorated, and on the table was the word believe. So I took a picture of that, made it an Instagram thing, and that was my word for the day. I'm not sure it has as much depth of meaning for me as some of the words might, so I didn't really think it through, but it got the job done. So I put it up. Hi, how are you? Thank you. Nice to be seen. Okay. Anybody? Have you finished your Advent calendars yet?
Not for today.
You shouldn't have finished them. It's only December 6th. But we have a few left, so don't hesitate. If you haven't yet started, you can start it today. I'll show you mine. This is the one that I intend to put on the bulletin board.
You were kind of busy.
I've been a little distracted the last week. I'll catch up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You didn't take it with your pop colors.
I carried it with me the whole time. I just never did it.
Forgot your colors, didn't you?
No, I brought the colors too. I just never did it.
It's good to know you're human.
Oh my God. Oh, I am human, I assure you. All right. That's the first one, and then I wanted to take just a moment to talk about St. Nicholas this morning. Just in case you needed a refresher, we're going to talk about St. Nicholas in my sermon today, and we have a St. Nicholas dinner this evening. So in some ways this is just redundant as all get out, but this was just a little bit different historical take on the old blessed saint.
All the way back in the year 303, when Emperor Diocletian demanded the destruction of the Christian faith, the leading pastor of the village of Myra was none other than Nicholas, St. Nicholas to you. You see, Santa Claus didn't begin his career as a chubby old coot who hangs out with reindeer at the North Pole. He was a pastor. He tossed some gold coins one time through a window, some said it was through a chimney, to provide dowries for 3 girls whose father had lost everything. And during Diocletian's persecution, the Roman governors tortured St. Nick and threw him into a dungeon. When he was finally released, his entire body was streaked with blood, and the people called out as they saw him, "Nicholas, confessor!" recognizing him as someone who confessed Jesus as Lord in the face of terrible torture. And when the false teachings of Arius got to Asia Minor, Nicholas stood just as firm as he had before. There's even some evidence that he showed up at the Council of Nicaea. The story goes that he got into a heated debate with Arius about whether Jesus was really the eternal God or not. At one point, Arius broke out into a song to defend his teachings. And the song was something like this. The uncreated God created the Son, the beginning of all things. The uncreated God adopted the Son, advancing himself as King. The persons in the Trinity do not share equal glory. Well, St. Nick didn't care for this tune. The debate ended, at least for a moment, when Santa Claus punched Arius right in the face, right in front of the council. If this really happened, it gives a whole new meaning to the song. He's making a list and checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice. Because teaching heresy is what will get you on this Santa Claus's naughty list. And if you do, you can end up on the floor.
Well, there you have it, St. Nicholas. Perhaps as you've never encountered blessed St. Nicholas.
We won't show it in the chapel.
We won't? Okay. Well, more's the pity. And then the other thing I just wanted to share with you, and this will give some of you a visual for when I talk about it at the later service, and some of you who heard what I had to say if you were closely attending.
The story of St. Nicholas.
Don't do me the story of St. Nicholas.
The true story of Santa Claus.
This might be the one you could show in Children's
Yeah.
Chapel, but you're not going to. This is something else that I mentioned in the early service sermon, and I'll mention it again in the later service. But this will just truly help you visualize what I'm discussing. This is, I think they're called Ifelen, and this is from a Swiss custom.
Swiss or Swedish?
What's Switzerland?
Swiss.
Just check.
It's from Switzerland, from a little village called Usnacht. And this is the Klausjagen, or part of the Klausjagen.
That sounds pretty German.
Well, see, that's because I'm not Swiss. said before, and I might remember to say again, if I'm ever in Switzerland on December 5th, I'll go find that little village of Kusnacht.
You won't be able to do it this year, of course, but maybe next year.
Maybe next year. That's what we say. Maybe. All right. Enough of that silliness. Back to the topic at hand, the whole election process. Thanks once more, and two of them are in the room here, Terry and Arlene, to members of the Search and Nominating Committee. I'm never sure, which were you officially? Were you the Search Committee or the Nominating Committee? Or were you the Search and Nominate? What were you?
Yes.
I don't think
Little
we
bit of
recommend
everything.
an official name, but I see it as surgeon.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of what I thought. And it goes back to one of the other questions. Are we candidates or nominees? And Barb and I have talked about it, and we generally would rather be thought of as nominees than candidates, because candidate sounds political, but nominee sounds political too, so I don't know anymore. So thanks to all those people, and thanks to the transition committee, a relatively small committee for the amount of work they have to do. But Charlie Cagle, who's a member of the church in Burns, and member of standing committee, he was our chauffeur this past week.
Wow.
Oh, you had a chauffeur?
Well, they piled us all into a Ford Expedition with 3 rows of seats, and Charlie sat in the driver's seat the whole way, and in the passenger seat riding shotgun the whole way, riding shotgun on us, was Janet Warner, who was our chaplain. So those were our 2 constant companions. The players change every venue along the way, but at least we had those 2 to keep us on the straight and narrow.
Well, you weren't so tired when you got where you needed to go then, if you didn't have to drive.
The driving part was easy. People asked, well, how are the roads? And I said, oh, they're fine. And Park would on more than one occasion says, that's because you weren't driving, which is a fair point. I wasn't driving. I don't know. No, the roads were, of course, last week. You'll remember how they were last weekend. I mean, the roads around here are just ice, because for some reason we don't know how to take care of our roads here. I don't understand that, but that's another guess. Once we got north of Redmond, Terrebonne, pretty much cleared off. We had freezing rain on Tuesday and Wednesday as we drove along a little bit. Not that it ever bothered me. We did see one wreck on the other side of the highway as we were driving towards Hermiston, somewhere between Hood River and the Dalles, or maybe just beyond the Dalles.
On 84.
Yeah, there was a jackknife truck and a little, I think, Prius caught up by it, and we saw people walking around. It didn't look like anybody was hurt, and there was hardly any traffic behind them, so we know it must have just happened. And it wasn't going to get cleaned off for a while. I don't know how they did that, but it was going to take a while before they could get in there and get the vehicles all squared away and get them out of the way so traffic could go again. So there was that, which was a cautionary tale, but Charlie he just kept plugging along. Kept us safe. So this is our route. Oh, this, by the way, is a symbol. I don't know how. Did you use it through the whole process, or did you? No, you wouldn't have. You would have used it with the weekend in Cove.
We had a candle lit at all of our meetings.
Okay, but this particular candle with 3 wicks. It's a purple candle, by the way. It's got 3 wicks because I think it's either Trinitarian, and maybe it was used before we got to the end. But at this point, it stands for the 3 nominees. So I kept watching it to see if one of the candles would go out. Though they weren't named, so I don't know what we would have made of the symbolism if they did. But we started, of course, in Sun River. We drove north through Maupin and up into Hood River for our 2nd night. Then we drove along here to Hermiston for our 3rd night, and then down here to Baker City for our 4th night, and then through Ontario to Burns for our 5th night, and then yesterday morning drove down to Lakeview midday. Thankfully we could do one midday on Saturday in Lakeview, and then drove up through Paisley, somewhere in here, and then up. And Barb and I are driving through Bend going, can we go home now? Our car was at St. Albans in Redmond, so we had to go up to St. Albans in Redmond after we dropped Churchill Pinder off at the airport to get our car, and then Barbara and I got to drive home. And we at least got to sleep in our own beds last night, which is more than I can say for Charlie, for Churchill, or for Pat. Janet did get home last night, and Barbara and I got to go home last night, which was lovely. And then I said, why did I want to preach this weekend?
Yeah.
So meet the nominees. That was, you've seen those sheets on the thing before. Those are the three of us.
Do you have some copies of those here?
Yeah, they're on the bulletin board back there. And at this point, I don't know, should we take them? We do have links to that posted on our website and on the diocesan website if you can access that yourself. They're on the bulletin board there, and we can certainly print one off for you if you wanted to get it done. Yeah.
I think John Collins, I hope he's been given due credit. He did a wonderful job. Didn't he organize?
He was the chair of the committee, and Arlene and Terry and I would all concur, and I think we've been trying to heap enough praise on him. And I did on one occasion at least have the opportunity to say, well, John Collins and that search and nominating committee, they're the ones you should thank for this evening.
Very organized, and I think that the write-up about you gentlemen and the questions they asked, it was wonderful.
We'll thank Arlene for that.
Oh, thank you, Arlene.
Sorry, Terry, I just decided to pick one of you since John isn't here. I'll give
And
you
she's
credit
the right
for
one. She did all the work.
Oh, okay.
Team effort.
So these were our venues. Again, I showed it on the map. And then the transition committee. This wasn't the nominating committee. The transition committee came up with these 6 questions. And I wasn't really clear what to do with them. I just knew I needed to do something with them. So Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, by the time I got home last week, I looked at those questions and I made note cards. Because we knew that these questions were going to come up in the course of the walkabout. I wasn't clear when. The logic of it came clear to me later. So they asked questions like, in Sun River, if you are elected to be the next bishop of EDEO, Episcopal Diocese of Eastern Oregon, how would you want to be remembered by people in the diocese at the end of your time with us? So I have a card that has some talking points so that I would at least have thought about it ahead of time. That was the point after all. Give them one question these people can have thought about so they might be ready for it. They don't bomb on the first question out of the gate.
So you didn't get all the questions that the people put in?
We did.
Beforehand?
Well, no, not beforehand, no. No, they blindsided us with every other question. These are the only 6 we had ahead of time.
Oh, that was not my understanding.
No, this was it. And so what the intention was on the first night we would get this question. The second night we would get this question. The third night this question. The fourth night this, fifth, and then Saturday we would get this. And it almost worked, except in the second night we got this question again. And they skipped over this one here, at least explicitly. But it came up in lots of ways over the course of the week, with various questions or concerns expressed, anxieties about the future, where we are. And I think that's on the threshold. My short version of the answer is the challenges before us are not so much on the threshold as like the kingdom at hand. And in fact, I think this diocese is on the leading edge of what the rest of the church is. We've been wrestling in this diocese with the challenges that face the whole church and will face the rest of the church more undeniably.
But we went through it first.
But we're on the front end of that.
That's
what I think. So how are we going to live with dwindling resources? How are we going to get by when church doesn't look like what we grew up with? I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And many of the congregations here have been wrestling with that most faithfully and creatively.
Bishop Nettie's been telling us about that for some time.
Yeah.
Stood right here and said,
Yeah. So we're on the edge of that. Joan, did you want to say something?
Well, looking at your questions, and having been to Sun River, it's too bad that whatever your answers were in Hood River or Hermiston, that we weren't able to hear the responses of all 3, because there's some questions there that I would have liked to have heard your answers.
I agree.
I think, and I'm glad you pointed that out. First of all, there's 2 things. In Baker City, we were videotaped. The intention being it was going to be somehow shared. So go to the diocesan website, tomorrow, the next day, until you can find it. But I don't know how they're going to make that known to us. But that was the intention of videotaping it. So one of the nights was videotaped. Roy Green on the first night, and there was an appointed person every other night, was taking notes with the intention of putting our responses out to the people through the diocesan website. I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm a little bit uneasy about it because I've read newspaper stories that I've had a part in, and they're never right. So I'm a little leery of letting go of editorial control, but there you go.
So it was not videoed each evening?
No, one night it was videotaped, and the other nights there was somebody taking notes, and again, we were told that the idea was to make sure that that would be available to people. How that's going to happen, when exactly, I don't know, but it better be quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have 1 week.
Yeah.
So it's my understanding that you only had one question at each stop?
Oh, no.
No, we were given one initial question at each stop, one of these 6, so that the first question was at least something that each of us had a chance to prepare ourselves for.
All right.
And then the rest of the questions came from the area convocations. So at the first 5 stops, that there was somebody who would stand up and say, these questions came from members of this convocation. It didn't happen that way in Lakeview because it turns out nobody sent in questions from that convocation. And so in that case, it was just people in the room asking whatever question
How many people were at Lakeview?
20, 25?
Wow.
Good.
That's good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
That was the smallest group. Burns was, I'm guessing, about 35. The other gatherings were anywhere from, I would say, 45 to 70. Sun River was the largest of them all, weather notwithstanding, but not by a lot. Not by a lot. And surprisingly, I think Hermiston was maybe more even than was in Hood River. So, I thought before I went any further with my show and tell, some of you were there. How many of you were at the event on Sun River? Wow. And the weather was bad. 2 cars from Sisters, I'm told, and maybe more, but I'm told that there were 2 cars from Sisters turned around and went home because of the road conditions or the accidents that were on the road ahead of them.
You heard about the jackknife south of town. Families left, where was it, Monomoth. It took them 9 hours to get here. They went south and ran into the jackknife, and there were people 6 hours sitting there waiting, running out of gas. I mean, it was bad.
So, yeah, it was kind of a mess that night. Yeah, that, by the way, is a part of what it means to live in Eastern Oregon.
That's right.
So that was a group shot I took from my podium when somebody said something that prompted me to pull out my phone and be just a little bit silly, because that was the question. I could go into it, but I'm not going to. Your comments, your reactions to tonight, what you heard, what you saw. Yes, sir.
It was good.
Good.
It was good.
I was really glad I went.
Why? What was good? Why were you glad? Can you say a little bit more, either one of you, about that?
I thought it was very informative from all 3. That'd be my first contact. So,
You mean with the electric?
yeah, you slipped a little in my mind, put it that way.
I'll beat up on you guys. Don't worry. My mind.
Be glad he doesn't have a vote.
No vote is a vote.
Yes, sir.
I thought that the answers given by all 3 of the nominees showed that our nominating committee, our
Good job.
selection
Very
committee,
good.
have done a very well job, and we had a lot of good responses from each one of the questions. But
We get to thank Terry for that one, because Arlene got credit for the other. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
no, that was.
No, I'd like to piggyback on that. I left really feeling confident that no matter which one it was selected, that we would be in
That's
good
how I
shape.
felt.
So that's was worth it right there.
And that was the refrain all week long.
Oh, good.
Nice.
You're the only one that come up with the ducks, though, so I thought to put you right back up.
I came up
The
with
best football team you came up with.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, somebody put me on the spot. You know, when you're put on the spot, you got to be decisive. So I just said the first thing that came out of my mouth.
That was good.
I didn't even.
I love the Beavers. I'm sorry. I love the Beavers.
You better say that.
Thank you for saying that.
Second.
Anything else?
I found that vision of all of you talking about how it's important for the church and for each community to go to spread ourself out into the community and not stay in-house. We need to bring that community in through outreach or whatever. We're going to be a bigger group of people, and also it kind of came out to me is that we need to work together as a diocese and running and making sure that the people who aren't coming to church or the younger generation somehow be creative and be inclusive to bring them in and you know, share our what we know is good and what we're doing. So I thought that was a good unity thing of all of you speaking.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
Thinking about the facts and circumstances of our diocese now, as you look at this position, do you see it more heavily managerial, more ceremonial? What are the big issues?
I think it's more pastoral
Yes.
in this diocese.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's administrative stuff, and one of the things that we talked about amongst the three of us, you know, along the road and everything else, is that, you know, while we each have a lot of experience in terms of numbers of years in different contexts and all the rest, the reality is, on the administrative piece of it, I think perhaps, reality is none of us have actually been trained to be a bishop. And one of the things that I've heard from a couple different folks, including our friend Alan, who's Bishop of Massachusetts now, is the day after the election, well actually probably the Monday after the election, the person elected gets a call from probably Clay Matthews, I don't know, somebody in the Episcopal Church offices. You get a call from Clay Matthews who says, 70% of what you've been taught and the skills you've gained don't transfer. And you're going to have to learn a lot. And so we talked a little bit about that. So we all have experience, but at the end of the day, those experiences aren't necessarily going to translate. And so it's going to come down to, you know, who is the individual and what other qualities do they bring to it, and what confidence, you know, do we have that those qualities will allow that person to, you know, sort of grow into that role, because there's some learning that has to happen. There are lots of resources for that. We've all received a letter telling us that there's a week in January where we're expected to go to, they used to call it baby bishop school. Try not to do that anymore. But it's a week-long introduction for newly ordained bishops. But they've told us that we are canonically obligated, even though I'm thinking to myself, but I wouldn't be a bishop yet. How can you oblige me to do something that I'm not? But anyhow, it doesn't matter. But there, and there's mentors available, and there's a lot of support for it. But there's a lot of work to be done. And so the question is, you know, who's the individual, and what confidence do we have in those qualities above and beyond whatever experiences or knowledge, you know, we bring to it. There's a whole other element that's a little bit less tangible.
That week you're gone, does Barbara get to go with you? There's things.
She is
that can
invited but not obligated. Yes.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I remember years ago when they had the Diocese of Oregon elected a bishop. It was online, the actual vote tally each time they did it. Is that going to happen with this? Do you know?
I presume, but I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know how.
Does
that's
anybody?
And if
Arlene?
Arlene doesn't know either, because
Not
the
my
search and nominating committee handed it all off to the transition committee, so it's in their hands. The standing committee is responsible for it, and I'm on the standing committee, but after the nominees were announced, I've absented myself from the standing committee because there's nothing I should be doing with standing committee right now, or with diocesan council. And so I'm keeping, keeping as far away from all that as I can. Every now and then somebody copies me on an email, and I try to basically ignore it because it's not my purview right now. So that's to say that I presume they intend to do that, but I don't know how that's going to happen.
Nice.
Let's go in the back. Yes, ma'am. Linda.
When you go to that obligatory week-long session, do you just kind of jump into, I'm not just rector anymore, I'm bishop? Or is there a transition time, say, a few months for you to kind of get?
There's going to be some transition. First of all, after the election, this is getting a little ahead of ourselves, of course. Somebody greeted me at the door and says, "When you're elected, what do we call you?" and I said, "Well, A, if I'm elected, and B, Jed still works."
Well, and it can be whomever is chosen, but is there a transition?
Inevitably there's a transition. And in my case, it's different than it would be in the other two. Because one of the things, again, I heard from my friend Alan when he got elected Bishop of Massachusetts, he got that call that Monday after, and he was told he didn't know enough. He didn't know nothing. And he was also told that whatever projects he was working on at St. Paul's, that was his church in Cleveland Heights, whatever projects he was working on at St. Paul's, he needed to close off. He was done. And the point simply was, once it's done, you really have to just sort of stop trying to do new things. You've got to sort of round out what you've got going. You've got to make that transition out of there pretty quickly, because you're distracted, inevitably. In Alan's case, it was actually worse because the sitting bishop was actively dying. I mean, he had cancer, and everybody knew it, and he was already not really doing everything he was supposed to do, and all the rest. They were all grateful he held on through the consecration and died shortly thereafter.
They just assume then that it's going to be confirmed by all the standing committees.
But that's the thing. There are some practical things that have to happen. There are consents given and all the rest. Normally one assumes, and I think with the three of us there's no reason to think otherwise, as long as the process is done correctly, that's a formality.
Who oversees that process?
Oh, there's processes. Notices go out to every diocese in the Episcopal Church. Bishops and standing committee have to give a majority consent, and until that's in, there's nothing official. And then of course the consecration itself is scheduled, and the date's known, but it isn't yet public. It gets announced next Saturday. I don't know why they're holding that secret, but I'm going to honor it because I was told they're going to announce it next Saturday. So anyhow, but that's just to say that there's inevitably some transition, and it's different in my case because in the case of the other two, they're going to retire essentially, and so they're going to be looking to ease out of their congregations in the near future and to move into this new position. So that's the transition they're looking for. And if I'm elected, I'm looking at transitioning incrementally into how we're going to be doing things later. And that's actually kind of a blessing, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging, I think, on the front end, because we can't assume it just waits until I'm half-time bishop. It's going to have to start, as we heard with an announcement, that I have to be away for a week in January, and I was not planning on doing anything different. So,
yeah, but you have lots of energy.
Well, explain a little more about if you were elected and you're going to be wearing two different hats, but you'll be here all the time as opposed to either one of the other gentlemen.
In terms of living, I'm living in Bend. My house isn't going to change. But I'm going to be on the road if I'm elected, just as they're going to be on the road.
Well, they were talking about they would be in the diocese 2 weeks out of every month, and then the rest of the time they would go home. Whereas if you're here all the time, are you gonna split your time 2 weeks and 2 weeks, or
I don't
are you
think so.
gonna intermingle these?
I think it's going to be intermingled
Yeah.
more, and I think that's the difference. And Katie Bullock, Kathy Bullock, some of you know her by now. We were talking about this early on when the announcement came on, and she just sort of quipped. She says, "Oh, it's like being a working mom." And it kind of is. Now, I'm a little hesitant to say that because I know some of the painful conflicts that have emerged societally about, working moms versus stay-at-home moms and who has a full-time, all that kind of stuff. So I'm a little, but it's still the same deal. A mom who works is still a mom. And when mom is home, the mom still has a job to worry about and to allow for. And people take homework these days more than they ever used to, and there's still that stuff even when you're home. Working dads still have the same problems too, but it's a different tension, I understand, for women, because the roles, for all that has changed, roles haven't all changed. Mark's like, yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
I was, on that same note, how did that affect your answers, knowing that you had to have 2 jobs, where the other 2 would
Well,
be-
sometimes the question got asked explicitly, which was helpful because then I could talk about it explicitly.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised at how many times it didn't get asked. And so I'm a little anxious about that, frankly, because I think there's a lot of assumptions out there about what that means that I haven't had a chance to address. I did try and raise it once or twice when it wasn't apparently going to be asked, but I can't ask. We were supposed to give answers in 3 minutes. Now, you know how hard it is for me to answer anything in 3 minutes. I'm not the exception to the rule in this case.
That's true.
Well, one thought I had when I heard the responses of both those guys saying they're retiring is things change. Both in the response that they're retiring and they're not living in this state, things change. It changed for Nettie mid-course, right? She moved from Washington to Illinois. I mean, things change. So
Even further.
Ohio. So we better not vote based on, oh, these guys are going to have all this free time to put in. Because, number one, we don't know that they will use their free time in that way. And number 2, things change. What if they decide to take a half-time job? There's nothing that prevents them from doing that.
There isn't. Actually, one of the resources I drew against was a bishop named Sean Rowe, who is Bishop of Bethlehem, I think. I don't remember now exactly. That was where he was elected to be bishop. But he's been called upon to be provisional bishop, kind of like what Nettie is, in another diocese in Pennsylvania. And he has to drive through at least one full diocese to get there. And that's how his job is morphed. So I mean, that's a fair point. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. One, could you explain who votes on Saturday and why it takes all those hours that they have set aside?
So, okay, thank you, yeah. Well, the first thing that's going to lengthen today is we're not going to just jump in and vote. We're going to gather and worship and pray. And that's a little annoying in some ways. But it's really critically important that we enter into this prayerfully.
Well, you
So
said we. Are you going to be there?
I am going to be there.
Are all of you going to be there?
No.
Oh.
Oh, good.
That's a little interesting and it's a little awkward.
He doesn't know.
It may arguably be an advantage, but I am a clergy person of this diocese, and
Oh, you have a
clergy of
vote?
this
You get to
diocese
vote for
votes.
He's a delegate. Yes, why wouldn't he?
So I'm going to be there, and I'm going to vote. And I can pretty much guarantee who I'm going to vote for, at least on the first ballot.
Oh, okay. That's all. I'm just wondering who you're going to
Yeah, I
vote
mean,
for.
it's a private ballot, so I don't have to admit it, but I'm going to own up to that one. So that's why it's long. The second part of why it's long is once you take a ballot, and they're going to have to be done in paper. There has to be a paper trail on something like this. If there are allegations or questions raised later, they have to be able to go back and look at the paper. And that's part of why we can't do it virtually. That's part of why. Part of the other, I mean, the bigger part of the reason I think is in our church we really do hold that coming together in convention, inviting the Spirit to lead us in our discernment, requires us to be in community and be together. and that's a little frustrating at times, but I think that's another piece of it. It takes time because then the paper ballots have to be taken into a private room where the counters can count it, and then somebody else can count it, and we can double check to make sure we did it right. And then we have to advise the 3 nominees the results of the first ballot. Because frankly, if it's really bad for one of us, we may opt to say, in the interest of helping the diocese move ahead in this discernment, I withdraw. In which case then the next ballot would be between 2, which may make it easier. My guess is, no matter how it plays out the first ballot, none of us are going to withdraw. We're going to wait until the second ballot. So they're kind of allowing 45 minutes between ballots to do those logistical things. We don't have a big diocese here, so it goes relatively quickly, but it's still going to take time, and we have to be really careful. In the Diocese of Massachusetts, they actually messed up on, I think, the 3rd ballot, and they realized they had miscounted some votes after they announced it and took the 4th ballot. And so then they had to come back and say, oops, we messed up. The 4th ballot is voided. We're going to go back to the 3rd ballot. Here's what the actual results were, and then they retook the 4th ballot. And nobody actually, but they had to be careful. And once they realized they made a mistake, they had to own it publicly and ask for the will of convention. What are we going to do about this? And it was relatively straightforward and non-objectionable, so they took care of it. But those things can happen.
So during that time, is there discussion?
Well, the chaplain for the transition team, the chaplain for the search and nominating committee will also be the chaplain for this convention. I don't know the logistics, and maybe Nettie will have a larger role in this than I think. But I imagine between things there will be time for go use the restroom, talk amongst yourselves. You know, politics pertain, and if they're not, the ugly politics that we see, in the other landscapes don't necessarily pertain. Our concern is for the body politic and for the common life. And so there will be conversations, inevitably.
But not as a group.
Not as a group. It won't be a debate, I don't think, on the floor. But I think there will be opportunities for folks to share, what are you thinking? What are you wrestling with? Where do you think we ought to go? And we'll look at the trends, and we'll see who's shifting, what seems to be the momentum, what seems to be the emerging will of the Spirit amongst us. And there may be, almost inevitably, there'll be a call for a prayer between each ballot, or a call for prayer into the next ballot. There may be an invitation. Let's sing a hymn. I don't know how it's going to be done here because I haven't been here and I don't know exactly what's planned. But those are the kinds of things that typically happen in this.
Okay, one other quick question. Do we pay the expenses? Like, did we pay for Nettie to fly from Cincinnati back and forth? Would we pay for a bishop in Boston to fly back and forth?
Her package, as I understand it, includes travel for her to come and go.
And that would be the same for Churchill Timber?
That will be a discussion between whoever's elected and the standing committee. That will be part of the discussion. Churchill has said publicly that that's on him.
Well, I heard him say if he was called to go back for a family, he had to go to his family during the 2 weeks he was here. That was on him.
That's what I
heard.
Yeah.
It was every time.
That's what I heard.
So that ultimately that isn't something those are questions. Those are questions we have. Those are questions that may or may not be answered to our satisfaction. The reality is, at the end of the day, it goes back to the standing committee. The standing committee will negotiate the final package.
We can't afford to keep this up. Let's try it.
The question I have is, after each vote, do you have to contact the other 2 nominees then?
After each ballot, the nominees will hear the results before it gets announced to the rest of the convention. The actual numbers.
Yeah.
And again, the point is that it allows us, in our piece of the discernment, to decide what we want to do in terms of going forward.
Is that number voiced to everybody?
And then it will be shared with the whole convention. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know if they have the technology to do a projection on a screen. I don't know. I just don't know that. But the results will be announced to the convention before the following ballot gets taken.
I seem to remember, and this was many years ago, would have been 2000 when we elected Greg, that they showed, and technology wasn't what it is today, what it is now. They showed it probably with one of those opaque viewers up on the screen, and there were more people, more
Overhead
nominees.
projector.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
right.
my God, nominees, but I think we took 5 ballots. So somewhere in that neighborhood there were, and because I remember looking at the trend, and the clergy votes separately from the lay people.
Right. Oh, yes, excuse me, that's right. So in terms of who goes, it's clergy have vote, active clergy, not retired clergy, active clergy in the diocese, and lay delegates. Those people whom we elected last January at our annual meeting, the lay delegates from Trinity go with other lay delegates from other congregations, and members of standing committee and diocesan council in this diocese all have vote.
So wardens don't.
Oh, and wardens, thank you, yes. No, and wardens do too.
Okay, since there's been an election in October, there are some people on the standing committee who weren't on the standing
Right, so
committee.
that's shifted a little bit, but our delegates don't shift.
But still, the new people are going rather than the old.
Yeah, it's current members of council and standing committee.
Maybe this has been said, and I just didn't hear it or don't know. Do the other 2 bishops that are running with you will not live here? They will live in their own homes?
For the immediate future at least, they intend to stay in their own homes. They have family and other constraints, and they both said in different ways at different times, I think, that's how they think they'll keep some balance. So that, and they referred back to the way Nettie's done it, and Nettie has reported that when she's here, and when she's not, she's not. And that allows her to keep it more or less as a part-time position, because that's what it's being paid for. That said, she also allows that she's available by email and by phone, and they all allow that they'll be available by email and by phone. I think how did Pat put it? He says, I'll be here 2 weeks, but I'm always, how did you put available?
He said. For emergencies.
No, that's not how he put it. He had a different way of putting it. Can you?
Well, he said it's a half-time position and a full-time hobby.
Well, that was one of the things he said, yeah. I mean, so vocation is how he was describing that, so.
And just to clarify, you said immediate, for the immediate future, they'll be there. Churchill has said for at least 2 years.
For at least 2 years. I mean, and that's what I mean really when I think immediate.
I
think
it could even
for the
be
foreseeable
longer
future,
than
they
2
intend
years.
to stay resident where they live.
They're going for working lives.
And to come in. Yes, Judy?
Since inquiring minds want to know, is somebody from this parish going to email everybody on the email list when the results are known?
I think there will be something that goes out to everybody once the results are known. I think there may even be the wherewithal, but I haven't spoken to anybody. There may even be the wherewithal to post updates maybe on our website so that you know after the first ballot's announced. But I haven't spoken to Bill about whether it's technically possible, but it's problematic.
I just wanted to kind of dig myself out of the hole and say I'm still voting for it.
Except you don't get a vote. Thank you. Appreciate that. I understood your point, but yeah, there were some drop draws in the room. Just a few shots. This is the Columbia River from Hood River. This is Barb jogging. First morning out. Second day, first morning, if you will.
Second morning.
Well, second morning, if the first morning was Monday, it was Tuesday.
The first morning was
Wednesday.
Sun River.
It was
The
Wednesday.
second
You're right,
morning-
Barb.
This was.
Just say yes.
You're right. This is.
I know I'm right.
I shouldn't even think about it. Let's just say yes. You're right. It was second morning.
When we have these discussions.
Here we are. There we are in the
I'm
car.
always right.
This was, I think, this had to be somewhere between Hood River and Hermiston. You can see the icy slushy roads. This is on our way to Baker City. This is the
Car
BLM.
broke down.
That's right, we had to take oxygen.
That was just a reality check, you know?
So much more reliable.
So this is the great visitor center for the Oregon Trail outside of Baker City. If you've ever been there, it's lovely. If you haven't, it's worth going to just for that. And she's pretty cute. Oh, I mean, no, she's pretty
Yeah, and I have to say, we are very proud of Barb. She was the only wife that was along on the wonderful trip. And she was adorable in Sun River. I don't know how she responded by the time she got to Lakeview,
I
but
I was even more adorable.
oh,
I'll show you. I have a picture of her. I have a picture of her yesterday afternoon.
oh,
This is Baker City. This is the crowd shot in Baker City.
that's huge.
See in the note, there's the candle with the 3 wicks in it. They're all going there. There's the video camera in the back. You can't really see it here very well. This is actually the same book from which the Blessing of Candy Canes comes from, Prayers for the Domestic Church. This is what Janet brought along for our devotionals. She would read prayers for us as we began. This is the Oasis Cafe on our way to Burns.
Ventura.
This is the church in Burns. This is back on the road again. Now we're heading down to Lakeview. This was yesterday morning. There's the priest in Lakeview. And there's Barb. Look at her.
Oh, she's still in her.
Look at her. This is sadly, this is the role of a spouse of a bishop nominee on Walkabout.
Big smile.
She did it amazingly well. God knows, as tired as I was of what I was saying, as tired as I was of what they were saying by the end of it, this poor woman had to live with it, and she had no control over what they were saying up front. And she still goes. So there we are. And then we're driving home. And there we were yesterday at the rest stop in
Silver Lake.
Summer Lake?
Summer Lake.
Silver Lake?
Summer Lake.
Summer Lake.
As I posted on Facebook, all smiles because we're done. And now it's all over to you, the discernment for deputies, delegates from our congregation for the clergy of the diocese. So, our prayer is still, God's will be done. I had better get vestments on.
So
Church
before you
starts in 3
go,
minutes.
January 17th, we're having Trinity talks. And it's spread the word. This is wonderful today to sit and listen to everybody communicating whatever you feel and have concerns about or just the joys. So it'd be neat at Adult Ed on January 17th if we could get more people. And the object is that we're going to talk and listen. He's going to sit and listen. And you're going to just share. So who knows what's going on with the bishop?
Could you put that out in a notice
It's
to
in
all
the
congregation?
It's in the trumpet.
Trumpet.
Already, but I just want to keep January 17th in your mind. Because I think we're a good congregation to just share whatever.